Hello and welcome back to another video in the NetWorker training series. In this video, we will be looking at the main workhorse of NetWorker, which are the policies, workflows, and actions. First, let's look at the definitions of each of these resources and then take a look at how to create, modify, or remove this from NetWorker in the demo. Policies enable you to manage all data protection tasks and data protection lifecycle from a central location. Policies enable you to define the resources and settings to implement your business policies for the data that you want to protect. They allow you to design a data protection solution at the data level instead of at the host level. You can design, for example, all Exchange backups under the Exchange policy, identify which hosts you want to backup, then assign all these hosts to the protection group. Next, you design the workflow and define the actions or tasks that you want to perform on the group of hosts, and also define when to automatically run the workflow and how often. At a very high level, it is a container that holds multiple workflow configurations. The workflow defines a list of actions to perform sequential or concurrently, a schedule window during which the workflow can run, and the protection group to which the workflow applies. The protection group and the workflow have a one-to-one relationship, meaning one group can be assigned to only one workflow and one workflow can be related to only one group. A workflow can be as simple as a single action that applies to a finite set of client resources, or it can be a simple chain of actions that apply to a dynamically changing list of resources, with some occurring sequentially and the other dynamically. The actions are made available to the workflow depending on the type of group it is associated with. The setting related to schedule of a backup job can be done on the workflow properties, which include the start time, interval, and restart window. Now, the actions are the main basic block of the configuration. The actions are the key resources in a workflow for a data protection policy. An action is a task that occurs on a work list. A work list is a list of pending items such as group of client resources or save sets. You can chain multiple actions together to occur sequentially or concurrently in a workflow. Now let's take a look at one of such work lists, and this is called a work path. Now the work paths that you see on the screen is server backup and NMC server backup. When you install or upgrade the NetWorker server, the installation or upgradation process creates a server protection policy with two workflows for NMC and NetWorker server protection. The first workflow on your path is the server backup. The workflow, which is created by default during the upgrade or the installation process, mainly has two actions. One is expiration. So an expiration action is used to mark all the save sets, expired save sets as recyclable. And then there is the server database backup action. A backup of the NetWorker server media database, authentication service database, and the client file index. The data in this backup is also called as the bootstrap backup. It enables you to perform a disaster recovery of the NetWorker server. The workflow by default is scheduled to start at 10 a.m. and the workflow is assigned to the default server protection group, which contains a dynamically generated list of the client resources for the NetWorker server. You could also create a workflow for the server backups with these actions and have additional actions like orphan saveset. If there is a saveset record in media database with no corresponding data on disks, these are called as orphaned saveset records. NSRIM marks these saveset records as suspects once the recover space operation is run for the corresponding device. Even if the NSR NMD service runs, it will mark the saveset only when recover space operation is run for the corresponding device. However, there is no definite time when space recovery might actually happen. The next workflow path is the NMC server backup. An NMC server backup action performs a backup of the Postgres NMC database. It can be followed by a clone. So a clone action creates a copy of one or more save sets. Cloning enables secure offsite storage. the transfer of data from one location to the other, and also can be used for the verification of backups. As mentioned before, the workflow action depends on the protection group that it is associated with. Here are a few workflow paths with the associated actions. So when a protection group client type is associated with the workflow, then the actions that are available to you are on your screen right now. A quick note here, you can only choose the next action in the path shown, but not the other way around. Meaning, if you have selected probe as your first action in the workflow, you cannot select check connectivity action to be run after probe. So a check connectivity always should be the first action that runs in the workflow. So in the workflow path here, we have check connectivity action first. The check connectivity action, as the name suggests, checks if the NetWorker server is able to communicate with the NSR execd service on the client machine. If not, then the action fails and the workflow is also marked as fail. No other action in the workflow after the check connectivity action would run. So next is a probe. Probe is based on a probe resource that can be configured in NetWorker. It involves a script to be placed on the client which returns a 1 or a 0, indicating if a backup is needed or not. A 0 indicates that a client backup is required, and a 1 indicates that a client backup is not required. So we will try to have a separate video on how to configure probe in NetWorker. I assume it is a very interesting topic for a few of you out there. So stay tuned for that video. Then we have the backup action. So you can either select traditional or snapshot backup. When you select this type, you must also select an option from the backup subtype list. So to perform file system backup, NDMP backup, NMDA, NMM, or block-based backup, you have to select the traditional type. To perform snapshot backup of a supported Dell EMC storage array or appliance, select snapshot. If you want to select a VMware backup appliance backup, select VMware as the subtype. And to perform the VMware backup using vproxy, that is the NVP method, you'll have to select the vproxy as the subtype. In case you use a snapshot backup, then you might want to follow this action with the generate index action that creates entries in the client file indexes for snapshot backup and for discovered snapshots. So a discovered action is used to discover snapshots on NAS device that the current NetWorker server did not create. NetWorker then creates a save set entry for the discovered snapshot and on a NAS client in the media database. Last in the list is a clone action. Clone creates a copy of one or more save sets. Cloning allows for secure offsite storage, transfer of data from one location to another, and verification of backups. You can have additional clone actions after this if in case you want to have multiple copies of the data. Next is the workflow path for clone. So clone workflow path is pretty simple because it can only contains one type of action, which is the clone action. Alright, so now since we have looked at all the definitions of what exactly a policy, a workflow, and an action means, let's go ahead and look at the demo on how to create, manage, and remove these resources from NetWorker. So for the demo, I will be using the lab, which is on VMware on my desktop. Alright, so we are on the NMC of my NetWorker server, and if you remember from our earlier videos, we had created a few of the protection groups that we have. A quick look at them. So we have the protection group of type client, dynamic client. These two belong to the type client. Then we have the save set type, which is meant for cloning, which is these two here. One is static and this is dynamic. And then we also have the VMware type, which is usually meant for backing up the or selecting or grouping together the vCenter objects, mainly the virtual machines. So to create a policy, you will have to come to the NMC. On the NMC, the networker administration window for the respective server. On in the networker administration window, go to the protection tab, and under the protection tab go down on the left hand pane to policies. So this is the one which is already created by default. I had not selected the creation of the NMC during the launch of the NMC, that is why I don't have uh, so this is the default protection policy that we spoke about earlier in during the um, this is the protection. This is the server protection policy that we spoke about in the slides. And if we go into the protection or server protection, you will see that there are two. So this is again created by me. So this is not one which is automatically created, but these two are automatically created. So let's take a look at the server backup action, and the server backup action, as we saw, has an expiration action and the server DB action. The NMC in turn has a server backup action, and this is of type backup, and this is the configuration. So let's take a look at first how to create a policy. So to create a policy, click on policies. You can right click here and select new, or come on the left hand pane, right click here and select new. Either ways, you're going to get the same window. Here are the different fields that are available to you. The name is pretty common, which is the name of the policy. It is going to be identified by this name. Once this is created, you cannot change this the name of your policy. This is going to be read only once the policy is created. The comment here is just a normal string that you can add, or description to describe what exactly this policy is meant for. This is the notification configuration. A notification is a notification can be a notification or the status with some details written out to a log, which is using the NSR log, or you can use SMTP mail in Windows or MailX in Linux to trigger an email to the administrator to update him or her on the status of the policy or of the workflows and actions that have run under this policy. The protection period is a unique configuration, and when this is enabled, you will be asked for a protection period, which is a duration for which the last successful backup under this particular protection policy will be kept for, irrespective of the retention set on the action. All right. So even though the backup action, which we are going to see in a few minutes, has a retention of lower than the one set for protection period, the protection period is going to be applied for the last successful valid backup of any systems or resources under this particular policy. So just for demo, I'm going to keep it for 1 month and click OK. Oh, I have to put in the rest of the configuration. So let me call this demo, and this is for YouTube for you guys. I'm going to keep the rest of the things as it is and select OK. All right. So now we have the policy created. Now it is an empty policy. If you can go back and check the properties again, you will see again this is read only, and the rest of the configuration can be edited. Now that the policy has been created, let's go ahead and see how to create the workflow. When a policy is empty, on the right hand pane you get this hyperlink, and you can click on this to create a new workflow, or you can just right click on the policy name itself and select new, and this will bring up the new workflow wizard or configuration window. Here you have the identity section wherein you can put the name of your workflow. For this demo, let's put the name DC file system. Then you can put an appropriate comment. In the notification section, you see that it is set as policy level, which means that the notification at the policy will be applied to the workflow as well. Or else you can always select on completion, on or failure to give an appropriate notification. For the command, you can give either NSR tail or NSR SNMP or the SMTP mail or mail X for email notification. Next, let's take a look at the running section. So this section enables us to configure the schedule. The first option here is the enabled parameter. If we disable the workflow, then this particular workflow will not be able to run even manually or automatically for that reason. So always keep this enabled if you want the workflow to be active, either to start automatically or to start manually. The next is the auto start enabled, which allows the workflow to start at the start time that is configured just below. By unchecking this, we will not be able to, or the workflow will not be able to run by itself automatically, and but it can be started manually. So let's enable that as well. Next is the start time. So start time is the time of the day when you want to start the backup, and we can change it to whatever time you want. So by default it is at 9 p.m. So the time interval is the duration between two backups. For example, if you want to run the backup every day just once, you can set the time as 24 hours. But if in case you want to run it twice a day, then you can set the time interval as 12. So it is going to start at 9 p.m. and then again at 9 a.m. Next is the restart window. So the restart window is the duration within which you can restart a failed backup so that the same configuration like level are applied to the back. Next section is the groups. So the groups is all what we have already seen, that is the protection group. You can either create a new group by clicking on the plus icon, or you can always select the groups from that you have already created but not assigned to any workflow. Remember that workflow and protection group have a one-to-one relationship. So for the demo, let's go ahead and select the protection group demo client, which is of the type client, so that we can take a look at all the actions that are available to us for this type of protection group. To add actions, come down to the action section and click on add, and you will see that the action type by default is backup. Now we can change it, and let's see what backup actions are available for us. Let's select check connectivity because that is the first action that is available. When you select this action type, you have the workflow section where you find the details regarding the policy, the workflow, and if there is any predecessor. We don't have, since this is the first action that we have in the list. You can also select if you want anything to run concurrent. So right now it is not. Then there is schedule, which is define and select. You can click on define to select the schedule on your right hand side. On the right hand side here, the schedule can be set with a period of weekly or monthly. Weekly meaning it is going to replicate the changes week-wise. Example, if you set the schedule to execute on a Sunday, then it is going to execute every Sunday of the week. And similarly, if it is monthly, if you select a particular day of the month and set a level for that, that is going to be replicated for every month coming after that. In the next window, we have the option if you want to succeed only after all clients succeed. That means that if any one of the client failed the check connectivity, then the action will be marked as failed. So as we know, if the action is marked as failed, it will not, the workflow will not proceed. Next window is the advanced section. Here you have the number of retries, meaning that if a connectivity check fails, then it is going to wait for the retry delay, which is 1 minute, and then it is going to retry again. And if it fails again, it is going to try again, and again until the number of retries is reached. Next is the inactivity timeout. This is the time interval in minutes. Inactivity timeout is the time limit that it is going to wait whenever it does not get a response from the client, and after 30 minutes it's going to time out and mark the action as failed. Next, parallelism is the number of clients it can process at the same time. Failure impact is if you want to continue or abort the action, or if you want to abort the workflow itself. So you can select any one of these. Regularly it is continue if any one of the check connectivity fails, that is. So if you need to understand anything under or any meaning of any of these parameters, you can always click on the question mark on the left hand corner. Next we are going to add the next action which is available for us is the probe. So again, probe requires a probe resource to be configured. You can see that the predecessor here is check connectivity, because the probe can be probe runs since the check connectivity is already configured. You can either select concurrent to run the probe concurrently with the check connectivity. The rest of the configuration is as it was for check connectivity. We click on next. This configuration is again as same as the earlier action as well. Click on next. Here as well we have a similar set of configuration: retries, retry delay, overrides, and parallelism is 0, meaning that it does not limit parallel activities. Alright, let's look at the summary. If everything is correct, click on configure. Now our probe is configured. Let's go ahead and add the next action, which from our list was the backup. So backup, again we have a subtype of snapshot or traditional. So as mentioned, the traditional is usually used for all the module backup and NDMP backup. So this is usually what we would be selecting for most of the backups. The workflow section is same as before. So we see that the previous action is probe, which is a predecessor of the backup action. The same selection for concurrent, which means that it can either run concurrently with action or after the completion. The right hand side shows you the schedule again, and you can either set it to define under select schedule or set it to select. There you can select an appropriate level. Log only type is meant specifically for SQL backup. The rest are for file system backup or any other type of backups that you want to configure. Cumulative incremental is equivalent to differential backup. You can use the this particular button here to make all the levels as full, and then you can click on individual one of them to change their levels. You can click multiple times to get the configuration. You can select the schedule resource from the select schedule. A schedule resource is a definition of the schedules that you can create. This allows you to have a centralized resource that you can change instead of coming and changing the schedule settings on each one of the actions. Now let's put it to define for our demo here, and then select next. Here we have the configuration for the data movement. You can select what destination storage node you need, what is the pool you want to use, the retention period, and the success threshold. You can edit the storage node by clicking on the edit icon. Then you can select whichever storage nodes you want to select, and then click on that icon again to complete your selection. The next parameter is the destination pool. So I have a pool that I have created. So select an appropriate pool for where you want the backups to go to. Always make sure that you have an appropriate device assigned to the storage node for the selected pool, or else your backups are going to fail. This is a retention period. Retention period is the period for which you want to keep the backup in the media database as well as on the target device. Next is the success threshold. So success threshold, we have two options: success and warning. Success means that the backup will be marked successful only if there are no warnings in the backup process and it has completed successfully without any warnings. So if there are any warnings, then this particular backup will be marked as failed. Whereas Whereas if in case you want the backups to be marked as successful, even if there are a few warnings, then you'll have to select the success threshold as warning. The next option, client can override and client cannot override. So client override behavior. It means that the parameters that we saw above, that is the pool, the retention, and the storage node, whether these can be overridden by the setting on the client instance. So on the client instance, you do have an option to select retention, pool, as well as storage node. And if you select client can override, then it is going to pick up the parameters from the client properties and not from the action properties. Whereas if you select client cannot override, then the configuration, then the backup will pick up the configuration from the action and not from the client properties. Then you have the DD retention lock. This is the retention lock on the data domain, which is used for compliance reasons, for a data to be kept for a certain amount of time. So even if you try to delete the data, which is younger than or which has a period shorter than this, you will not be able to delete that data. Next is the override section and the retry section. This is very similar to what we had earlier. So let's go ahead and see next. Let's look at the summary and hit configure. So now the backup action is completed as well. Let's go ahead and see what else we have. So clone is the only action that is left to be configured, since clone is the last action in the list. So you can see the previous action is backup. The schedule is similar to what we saw in probe and check connectivity, which is execute or skip. So you have to select the schedule appropriately. Then click next, and here you have the data movement section, wherein you can select the storage source storage node, the storage node which from where the read is done, the destination storage node where the write is done, and the destination pool. You can select the delete source save sets after clone completes to delete the save sets from the source device. So this is more like a move of the save set than a copy. So this is similar to what staging does in NetWorker. You can also override the retention with a new retention just for the clone data. 3D retention lock again, similar to what we had in backup. Then we have a filter section, as the input for the clone action is the output of the backup action, meaning that whatever save sets have been generated on the backup action are inputs to the clone action. So you can further filter this using using these options here. Let's click on next, and this is again the advanced options, which is similar to what we have already seen till now. Go ahead and click next to see the summary and click on configure. So this was the last action. What happens if we try to create another action? Let's go ahead and try and do that. So again, we have the clone action type. So as I told you, clone is the last action type in the backup related workflow, and you can have multiple copies of the data. So if in case you want to have multiple copies of data, then you can go ahead and select as many clone actions that you need. Let's go ahead and click OK, and this is the workflow that is created. When you highlight the workflow, you will see all the actions on the right hand side. You can select an appropriate name, but I usually keep the same name as the default, that is backup for backup, clone for clone, and so on. On the bottom part of the right hand pane, you have the workflow visual representation, which represents the entire workflow and the associated protection group. So first you have the name of the protection group. Here it is the demo client, so you can hover on the icon there to check the details. Then you have the check connectivity action, then the client to the backups, which is fed as an input to the probe action, and again the client to backup to the is set as input to the backup action. Then you have the destination pool for the backup action. After the backup, you have a clone action and the respective clone pool. So this is how you create a workflow which is related to backups. So let's now try to create a new workflow for the VM backup type. Let's name it VM backups. Now let's go ahead and select an appropriate protection group for this. Let's select test VM, and then you click on add to add your first action. And you see that the action type here is backup type, and the backup subtype is VMware NVP based, which is vproxy. The rest of the configuration is similar to what we have already seen. Click next, and you will see the difference here is with the vproxy. So we have the destination storage node, the retention, and the vproxy. So vproxy, you have two options here: auto select vproxy or manual selection. Auto selection is wherein NetWorker selects the best matching or appropriate vproxy for this particular backup, or you can manually select the vproxies. And here, since I have only one vproxy, there is only one vproxy listed. Else you'll see all the vproxies that you have configured in that list, and you can select the appropriate vproxy there. Then you have the destination pool, where you can select the appropriate destination pool. And you have application consistency, Quas application, wherein if you select Quas application, then during or before the snapshot is being taken, the data in the buffer as well as in memory is flushed to the hard disk, so that you have a consistent state of backup. And if you disable it, that quasing process is not done. Next is the advanced options, which we have already seen as how it works. Click next to see the summary and configure to complete the configuration. You can go ahead and select OK to see that the workflow for the VM backup has been completed as well. So let's go ahead and try creating a clone workflow. For this, you need the SafeSet type. Let's go ahead and try and create another workflow for clone. So we'll name it as clone of demo, and then let's select the SafeSet group DC, and then you can see that the first action that we have here is clone. The rest of the configuration is similar to the clone action that we have seen earlier. You do have generate index as well for SafeSets that do not have a client file index. So we're just going to go with clone because there are no snapshots that we want to generate client file index for. Data movement is again same, destination storage node, source storage node, destination pool if you want to delete the source save set or no, if you want to override the retention. Advanced options is again the same. Click next to see the summary and configure. So there we have it, the three types of workflows that we can create in NetWorker. There are more where you can create backup types of snapshots and so on. So this is all I have for this demo of workflow, policies, and actions. Thanks for sticking with me till the end of this video. I hope you found this useful. If you have any questions or comments, share it with our community in the comment section below, or you can drop me a message at my Twitter account. I will see you on another video. Goodbye.